Recommendation number 2, Commissioners.
Recommendation number 2 is to prohibit units that have been subject to an Ellis Act eviction within the last 5 years from registering on the short-term rental registry. This is in Supervisor Kim's ordinance. The department believes that this will add another disincentive for evicting tenants through the Ellis Act by taking away that short-term rental provision. It also allows someone to then do a short-term rental after a period of 5 years, so it doesn't cut them out of the market completely.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I'm actually supportive of this recommendation, but isn't it the case that Supervisors Kim and Breed decided to eliminate this amendment?
My understanding was that Supervisor Breed wanted to take out her private right of action provision for units that had been subject to the Ellis Act eviction.
If I can jump in again,
Marlena
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, because these amendments were actually added by the Board of Supervisors at a full board hearing to this ordinance. So
okay, so she can't take it out herself.
Exactly, the Kim and Breed packet. So she can't just take it out herself. It would formally have to come out either because this ordinance gets tabled when it goes back to the Land Use Committee of the board, or if it actually proceeds to the full board would have to vote to take it out at this point because they put it in. So I would recommend providing a recommendation on this item, even though Supervisor Breed has indicated she would request that the amendment not move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ellis.
I'm supportive also, but just a question. You're currently prohibited from leasing your Ellis active unit or apartment for 10 years. Does that not apply to, leasing it as an Airbnb unit? I mean, so I don't want to lower it if it's 10 years because you can't lease your property for 10 years. I just don't want to lower it to 5 years.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne again. So under the current law, the permanent resident of any unit, assuming they meet all the other qualifications to do a short-term rental, can rent their unit as a short-term rental. So although, let's say you bought a building, you Ellis acted it, and then it was sold as condos, and let's say that, in fact, everyone who lives in that building is the permanent resident of their unit. They own their unit. They live there. They otherwise qualify to be on the short-term rental program. They would be able to do a short-term rental because we have, in the administrative code and in the planning code, said that if you qualify and comply with the short-term rental program, then your use remains residential. It's not considered a commercial use. It's not considered a leasehold.
But just a clarification, you as the owner would not be able to move out and rent that unit for 10 years. But you could rent a bedroom?
That's my understanding. But or you could, if you go on vacation, and comply with whatever the time limit cap is, you could do a short-term rental of your unit, assuming that you otherwise meet the qualifications for short-term rental. So you would have to be the permanent resident of that unit. You'd have to be registered with the department. You'd have to have insurance.
Could you rent out, forget short-term rental, could you rent out a portion of your home that's been Ellis acted?
I'm not an expert in this area, so I'm...
It just seems to me that there's a distinction. You can't rent it out, but you can do short-term rentals is odd. But I'm supportive.
Commissioner Antonini.
I heard an opinion that the courts have frowned on anything that, treats Ellis-acted situations under the law differently than other situations. And I know that we are allowed to have a regulation that you can't, maybe it's the state law, you can't involve in rental activities for 10 years. Is that statewide, City Attorney? It's not a local?
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, I'm not familiar with that. I think that I'm not familiar with that provision that says that's the time limit. I believe that's in state law, but I can't.
Well, there is some time period. It might be 5, but whatever it is in there. This would be consistent with that. But I don't like the other instance where the son is guilty, being held for the sins of the father. Because if someone else had evicted someone and then it's turned into condos, and then you buy a condo and then you want to do a short-term rental in your condo, then you're not allowed to for nothing that was a fault of yours. So I think this is an avenue where it could cause a lot of problems, and I think we're kind of it's not that much of a disincentive anyway, so I'm going to probably not support this.
Commissioner Wu.
I'm also happy to support. I wanted to get a sense from staff how something like this is enforced. Does the rent board send over information regularly on where Ellis Act evictions have happened, and how would that be integrated into the work?
Yes, following the mayor's executive directive from end of 2013, we have improved our coordination with rent board. We do get regular reports from them of these units, as well as we have a referral process. So when we do get questions, we can contact rent board and get answers.
And is there a, going back in time, a list of buildings where there's been an Ellis Act eviction?
They do maintain those records.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Commissioner Richards.
I think that whatever we come up with, it should just be harmonious with when you're able to run it long-term. So if it's 10 years, it should just agree. I support Commissioner Hillis's recommendation.
Commissioner Moore.
I would like to ask the city attorney to use the example of an Ellis acted building turning into condominiums. Most condominium associations have laws which prohibit Airbnb because of the multiple ownerships in a building like that, but I'd rather look at an Ellis acted building where somebody just wants to command fixing up the building and commanding higher rents, and how does that play itself out for short-term rentals?
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, I'm not sure what the question directed at me.
Yes, that's I would like you to use a different example, because to say a condominium building, an owner would be allowed to do it is not exactly the question, because most condominiums have CCNRs which prohibit short-term rentals.
Well, whether your CCNR or your lease prohibits short-term rentals, the city does not regulate. So we would not be involved with regulating whether someone is permitted under either their lease or their homeowners association agreement or any other agreement like that from doing a short-term rental. We just look at whether they comply with our requirements for short-term rental.
I am interested in how Ellis Act evictions applies to buildings that remain rental but are trying to be turned into high-end rentals. Would the provision for 5 years not being able to do it apply there?
Well, under current law, the only situation where you can do a short-term rental is if you are the permanent resident of that unit. So if the unit doesn't have a permanent resident, are you using the example where a building has been emptied out and it's just the whole building's turned into short-term rental?
No, the whole building is turned into new high-end rental, and these high-end renters.
I believe to the point that was made earlier, there's a time limit where you can't re-rent the unit.
Okay, so it would be the same. You can't do anything. You can't do short-term rental, or you can't do.
My understanding that once
rental.
the Ellis Act's been invoked, that you can't re-rent unless if it's to the tenant that was evicted for a period of 5 years after the eviction. I think it's a 5-year period, and that would be consistent with this. But I do hear the concerns about whatever the number is, making it consistent with whatever the broader requirements are of the Ellis Act.
That is the answer to my question. Thank you.
Commissioner Richards.
Just one other quick point. The Ellis Act, it goes against the deed. It's recorded on the deed. I mean, it's definitely disclosed to the buyers that they're buying a condominium that's been Ellis Acted, and they realize that there are restrictions on it. That's, I think, a given.
I think there was a reporting requirement, but I do not know off the top of my head if it's a deed restriction or if there's just registering with rent board. Or
I support number 2.
Okay, Commissioners, shall I call a question on recommendation number 2? And I think procedurally, I think I figured it out. We'll in the resolution itself, if that's okay, we'll identify which commissioners voted for and against each particular item.
Yes.
And then at the end, then for the entire resolution, it'll be whether or not all of the commissioners agree on the account of what was recommended by individual line item. Okay? All right. Very good. So on item 2, for the prohibition of Ellis Act eviction, Commissioner Antonini.
No.
Commissioner Hillis.
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That item will be recommended 6-1 with Commissioner Antonini voting against.